Have I got a treat in store for you today? I am so excited to have Chris Burkard here with me, a self-taught photographer and artist based in Central Coast, California, whose work encompasses surfing, the outdoors, lifestyle and travel. Most often centered around the ocean, Chris's images are punctuated by energized landscapes, adventure seeking, and the lifestyle that comes along with that. Chris uses the tool of surfing to capture the ocean's intricate personality and extends that to include the human personalities that draw meaning from it. Searching for wild, remote destinations and offbeat landscapes, Chris Burkard portrays the humble placement of the human in contrast to nature. Currently, he serves as senior staff photographer for Surfer magazine, contributes regularly to various international publications, and is a project photographer for Patagonia and other respected brands. Just 3 of his many prestigious awards include the Red Bull Illume Spirit for 2012, Open category winner in the 2012 World Open of Photography, and the Flame Grant Award for Best Emerging Photographer in 2006. So hi Chris, I'm so thrilled to have you here with me today, and I know we've got some amazing things to talk about. In fact, we've got so much to talk about that I'm not really sure how we're going to fit it all in, but anyway, it's great to have you here.
Oh, thanks so much. I appreciate you having me, Nigel, and I'm really looking forward to chatting.
So let's jump right in, literally. In today's episode, we're diving into the exciting world of surfing photography in some of the world's most inhospitable places imaginable. So your specialty is surfing photography, and that's one of my favorite sports to watch, actually. But it doesn't always fit most people's ideas about surfing in that warm, sunny beaches of Hawaii or Australia and all that kind of thing. You also photograph in places where most people would say you were absolutely crazy just to get in the water. So how in the world did that happen?
It's such a funny one, I feel like, in a way, surf photography found me rather than me finding it. And I was always drawn to this idea of kind of taking it to, I guess you could say, the next level. Some people would define what we're doing as the furthest thing you could ever imagine from the sunny beaches of Hawaii. But I was really drawn to want to I guess go further and go to places that spoke to this idea of exploring wild, sort of untapped landscapes, and that's kind of what I was drawn to. So essentially, within the world of editorial, I wanted to go and create new content that could be viewed and inspire people, and that's really what brought me to the Arctic, because that's where the most potential for perfect waves are these days, and that's the place that people just haven't been. So there's an element of exploration that's still alive there.
Wow, I mean, I'm used to seeing folks like Kelly Slater and all those guys, surfing out there in Fiji and Hawaii, and I know they do some Atlantic surfing out in France and Portugal and all those kind of places, but I think until fairly recently, I was quite ignorant of the fact that there were people up there in the Arctic, up in places like Norway, surfing these waves. It was really quite an eye-opener when I saw that. Now, surfing photography sounds like an exciting way to make a living for anybody, but how would you say that it differs from, say, other forms of sports photography?
Well, it presents very specific challenges. See, that's really a good question, actually, and I'm glad you asked it, because it's one that I don't get asked very often. There's an element to surfing where I could go and shoot a horse race, or I could go and shoot a basketball event, or I could go and I could probably shoot motocross as well. I don't think I would do it as good as some of the real veterans of the sport, but with surfing, you can't just throw somebody in the water with a water housing and tell them to go and get a photograph of that guy in the barrel. It really you have to understand. You have to have a real acute knowledge of the sport, as well as the energy in the ocean. It's such a funny way to say it, but really you have to be able to be relaxed and know how to be comfortable in the ocean and obviously know how to swim. But it's a very niche thing that is of huge value, I think, and that's what kind of gives, I think, surf photographers kind of that blanket term. And it's a term that I've actually, in some ways, I hate, because I feel like it just puts you into a little box, and I never really wanted to be that, to be like labeled a surf photographer. But I also know that there's a lot of respect that comes from that, and what we can create there.
I understand a lot of what you're saying because I was an underwater photographer for about 4 years, working in much warmer places like the Red Sea and
Wow.
the Cayman Islands. But as you say, you can't just give somebody a camera in an underwater housing and throw them in the ocean and then say, okay, now go photograph some sharks or whatever you see down there, and expect them to come back with images that you would put in a magazine or something like that straight away. Because
Totally.
as you say, you have to have a deep understanding for the subject. And I'm 100% certain that if I were to go jump in the ocean tomorrow, not having done it for a long time, I would be really rusty. It would take me a long time to get my eye back in. Now, is most of the work that you do prearranged as kind of formal assignments, or is it a lot of it opportunistic type stuff?
A little bit of both. The funny thing is, I've always been the type of person that has really been involved in planning and executing my own trips. I mean, I would consider myself almost just as much a producer than anything else because, I'm concepting and figuring out these locations and places to go, and I'm working with a really talented writer or a really talented group of athletes to kind of plan out these projects and these places. So it's never really something where it's just, something that someone's calling me up and saying, hey, go here and do this article. It's much more about me, like, kind of looking and scouring the globe for where we want to go and what we want to create, and then coming back with that, and whether that means a film or a book or an article for the magazine or even planning and doing like an advertising shoot in some of these locations. That's really, I usually kind of work in that regard. I think maybe it's just because in some ways I'm a control freak, or I want to have that creative control. It's just something I value a lot.
Let's talk a little bit about this video that you have. I'm sure, there's probably more than one, I'm sure, but the one that I saw was called Arctic Swell, and I first came across it on CNN, actually, I think it was. They had put a feature article about you on there, and I watched this video, and I was just completely captivated with it. It wasn't just the photography, it was the words that you used to describe what you were doing, and I was really impressed by that. And I was really left with the sense that you're someone who has much more than just a love of surfing or photography. There's a much deeper reason why you do what you do. And you shared, obviously, some of that earlier on. But do you have any more thoughts on that at all?
I've always said this, and I think that there's an element, the places that we go, there's an element of suffering that you have to endure to create good imagery. I've always been one to embrace that. I've always been one to know that, I feel in some way like what you leave in that location, the blood, sweat, tears, that's really the experience, that's the gain. And for me, photography has always been a psychological process, one that's very dear to my heart and very much an experience that has given me everything. It's given me an education, and it's given me a means to travel. And so combining, my passion for wanting to see the world and being, especially this young kid who didn't ever have that opportunity ever, it was pretty mind-blowing to realize that I could marry my passion of, being in the ocean, surfing, and being in the water with traveling and be able to find a way to actually make money at it. I feel grateful every time I pick up a camera for any opportunity. And so it's really, there is I have a very close connection with it, and I feel very lucky to be able to do it. And at the same time, I think it's just a matter of, how we can create an experience for the viewer so that they feel a tiny bit of that. They feel a little element of what that means, And I think that's the hardest part I always find, and I've always aimed to create images that ideally, they put the viewer in that experience. So sometimes that doesn't always work well because what happens is, I'm not out there shooting photographs to keep advertisers happy. I'm out there shooting photographs to keep the viewer happy. I want to, pull back, show the whole scene, show something that really speaks to like the beauty and of the place. And that's sort of what I've always sought to do. So.
Certainly those places are truly awe-inspiring, and I know in the video you said it's like walking on the moon, and you're actually the second person that has used that phrase when talking about something really quite deeply affecting as this type of work. And the other guy was a gentleman called Steve Thomas, who is a deep cave explorer and a musician as well. And he would write music that was sort of inspired by his caving adventures. And the title of his album was actually "More People Have Been to the Moon," which was a reference to the fact that this particular cave that he had been to was, more people have been to the moon that have been inside this cave. That experience, that it's very difficult to articulate, what it really means. Some years ago, I was fortunate enough to take a submarine ride to the bottom of Loch Ness in Scotland. And not only was it like going to the moon, because the landscape down there, the bottom was just very, very lunar-like. The pilot of the sub said, what you're looking at, we are the only people in human history that have ever seen this scene.
Wow, that's so special. I mean, that's what makes life in so many ways worth living, is the ability to experience things that, that push us further, not as photographers or as whatever, but just as humans. It makes us, transforms us, in a way.
Yeah, and I love what you said at the end of the video about learning something new about yourself every time you take a photograph. I think that's something that is so important to our growth as photographers. Otherwise we just end up kind of stagnating. So a quick question about the environment up here in the Arctic, or up there in the Arctic, I should say, because I'm not there. How different is the light in the Arctic? Now, what I mean by that is, how does it contribute to how you want to portray the personality of that place?
Well, the light there is something special. It's really, really incredible. And when I say that, I mean, that's what brings me back. As a photographer, light is everything. Light's, it could be, your source of food per se. And essentially, I think what happens is when you go there and you have this opportunity to see the sunset last for 4 or 5 or 6 hours, that's really unique and crazy special. It's a really cool thing to see the Arctic light and the way the sun stays super low in the horizon. I think that for me, that's one of those elements of going there that, you're going to see. You don't see the sun often, but when you do see it, it's something so special and it's so unique that it's worth. The photographs are going to be different. You're never going to go to. I've never been to a place and seen it look the same ever. It's not high noon in in southern Utah. It's something different always. Whether that means it's cloudy or it's perfectly crystal blue water or there's northern lights or whatever it is. So.
It sounds almost as if the Earth has got its own photo studio going on up there with the lighting, just how you want it to portray the drama of this beautiful landscape that's around you.
Yeah, and that's essentially it. Is kind of marrying those two concepts of the landscape with this epic light is what I think gives us that in a way celestial feeling of wow, you're looking at a landscape, but ideally it's more than that. It's something that ideally speaks to wanting to kind of get back to the root of everything, which is seeing a beautiful place and being inspired to go there. There's something to be said for people being able to see an image or be able to be so inspired by something that it makes them want to pack up their house, quit their job, and go and see the world. And that's, I think, that the goal of not that you want everybody quitting their jobs, but I think that you want to be able to inspire people, and that's been my goal from day one.
So with the ocean, there's a lot of safety concerns. You can't just hurl yourself into the Arctic Ocean with a pair of swimming shorts on and a T-shirt. It's cold for one thing.
Yep.
How do you balance that with the desire or the need to get the shot that you're after? Let's say the conditions might be rough, because we know that they are some of the roughest seas up there, and that if you put yourself in a specific place, you're going to get a great shot. How do you balance that with all the safety issues?
Well, there's an element to being young and dumb. It's just an element of you take risks, and sometimes you have to understand and know your limits, right? Mm-hmm. So there's times where I'll be out in the Arctic or swimming, and I'm like, okay, well, I know that no matter what, it's going to get cold, it's going to get brutal, and I think that you have to kind of take those things into consideration. I think that there's an element of it of being just dumb. You don't want to go out there and just not be intelligent and just get freezing cold and then get sick and then you ruin the trip for everybody. Or for example, when we're in Alaska, in the remote, the Aleutian Islands. And if I was to go swim and I like broke a camera and say like, I didn't have that camera the rest of the trip. So there's certain, I think, risks you take, like a lot of times I make sure that I have everything nailed. If I'm doing a surf trip, and I have to make sure I have everything nailed from land first, so that before I jump in the water, if I, get sick or something happens or I get injured or a camera breaks, that I know that I'm not jeopardizing the trip. Secondly would be anytime that you're going out in the water, you're preparing yourself mentally, physically, so that you're like getting warm first, and then you're making sort of educated decisions, but there's still that element of risk. Risk management is a role that you have to take on whether you want to or not. Being the photographer and essentially like the producer of a lot of these trips that we go on, you're not only assessing the risk for yourself, but you're assessing the risk for everyone else. And whether that means, trying to make sure that, the athletes, the guys aren't going out there and taking unnecessary risks to go surf some crazy wave that breaks them half mile out to sea. Like if one person gets injured, myself especially, then the trip's over for everybody, So there's a lot of making, educated decisions based on, the needs and desires of the group rather than just the needs and desires of one person. So there's times where I want to go out there and swim in the water super bad, but I know that I'll get better content, I'll get better imagery from land. So I have to you have to suck it up and be like, okay, well, you have to shoot what's going to be the best thing for the article right now. And sometimes you'll have, 3 or 4 guys in the water all across a beach, over like a quarter mile long. You can't be everywhere at once. So if you go swim in the water, you have to go next to the person that you want to get the images of, right? Yeah. So there's, and it's hard to kind of explain, but in a lot of ways, you have to take those things into consideration, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's just, on every trip, there's elements where, I'll ask the guys okay, let's not go surf this wave yet. Let's go at the end of the trip, because if somebody gets injured, that's it. You're done.
And that's an interesting point, actually, that you brought up in there, which is, I think, another differentiator between this type of photography that you're doing and, say, regular team sports photography, and that is that you're part of the team.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the surfers and the photographer, and I'm assuming that there's other people involved too. They're all part of a single unit.
Yeah, and I think it's because with surf photography, you can't be a bystander in order to really get what you need. You can't be on the sidelines all the time. You have to be sometimes in the action, in the element, in everything, more than you want to sometimes. I can't tell you how often I've had to jump on the back of a jet ski and get dropped off in the middle of the lineup and swim to the beach. That's not a fun thing to do necessarily sometimes when you're in somewhere where there's big creatures under the water or somewhere that's really cold. So it takes a lot of, that's what I mean. You could, a lot of times you can go out there and shoot, skateboarding or something like that. And maybe you don't even have a real deep understanding of the sport or of the craft. But with surfing, I feel like you really have to inherently know what you're doing. And I guess what I'm really talking about is kind of being at the upper echelons of documenting it, like myself, I think there's a lot of folks that probably just grab a camera and go to the wedge and take pictures, but I think to be traveling to the places that we're going with, the guys that we're going with, it's a different deal for sure.
I think to do it successfully at that level, I think it has to run through you like a natural part of you.
Yep.
It becomes automatic and completely unconscious, your understanding of the sport.
And I think in a lot of ways you're engaging yourself, your subconscious. You're not relying on knowledge, that you need to learn while you're there. You're kind of relying on a lifetime of knowledge that you've already gained, especially when you get in the water. You're not, it's like decisions are being made so fast and so intimately that they're just happening, sometimes without us really thinking about it. So
let's talk a little bit about the business and the marketing side of this type of work. Obviously, we, as photographers, we all need to sell the products of what we do in order to make a living at it. So how do you go about marketing and selling your work outside of what you do, maybe for the magazines and that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a big, I think first thing that people, need to know, obviously, is that, 90, nowadays, maybe 10 years ago or 6 years ago, a big part of my work was just shooting surfing for editorial and advertising. But nowadays, most of my work is consumed by shooting advertising commercial work that still speaks to those, natural and authentic lifestyle moments that are geared around surf culture. But I'm not necessarily always going out on trips like I was. It's really more about bigger projects. And I find that equally, it doesn't matter what you're shooting, the most important thing is that, if you could shoot the greatest image in the world, but if you don't have a way to get it out there, then nobody's ever going to see it, nor are they ever going to care about it the way that you do. So it's so important that we have a clear understanding of what marketing resources we have available to us, whether that means magazines, whether that means advertising, whether that means Instagram, social media, Facebook, whatever that is. The beauty now is that literally every person on earth can start a network. And when I say network, I really do mean like a network. Like sometimes, as powerful as Fox News or something like that, there's people out there who have, millions of followers on these channels, and they can put out a message that will be really broadly received. So it's really interesting to me to think about the fact that anyone can open up a network and anyone can start to put a voice to, their imagery or their work. And that's really unique, I think. That's something that we need to all embrace. And I always talk to photographers who they reach out and like, oh, how do I get published here? How do I get published there? And, I feel in some ways like that's maybe nowadays in 2014, that's maybe not the right idea. Maybe it's about, put your work out there to just let it resonate and let it be found and let it be sought out. Don't hold so tightly to all your pearls so that you can give them to a magazine, but maybe those images will do more for you if they're put online somewhere in the right way and put out to mass media to see. I can't even express how many big commercial jobs we've gotten from our social media channels. So the fact that those are orchestrated and done very well is very important to me.
Yeah, and I'm sure that your social media outreach and all that kind of thing is done from a very strong point of connecting with people and engaging with folks in a normal sort of way, as opposed to just, hey, look at my work. Here's another photo. Hey, look at my stuff. I'm great. I'm awesome. Look at me. I'm a fantastic photographer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is like I can't express how important it is that to me it's all about inspiring people. And if you don't have a good message with your work, then people see through that. Consumers nowadays, and and I say consumers liberally because I also know that they're just people. They're out there looking to have some substance. They want to digest what it is they're looking at. And so if you're just like putting yourself out there all the time, that's why I'm not out there taking selfies. We're out here trying to speak to an ideal, and a pursuit of what it means to be in wild places and enjoy life. And that's, I think, the greatest message that I could ever share. No amount of, advertising dollars that I ever make is going to make up for, being able to know that my images did something to inspire someone to go somewhere.
So what would you say would be your 3 top tips for aspiring sports photographers who, want to really kind of get started or looking to get their work featured?
That's an interesting one. That's a good question. There's so much out there that we can do, but I think 3 things that I would do is I would say, first of all, create work that speaks to your personal style or aesthetic. Create photographs that people are going to recognize are inherently yours. And I mean, for me, the greatest compliment I've ever been given and still get sometimes to this day is when somebody says, oh, I saw your photo and I knew it was yours before I looked at the caption. Like that. That's everything. That's everything to me. It's worth its weight in gold. So, that's huge. Secondly, I would say, do what inspires you and shoot what inspires you. If you are getting stagnant and you are getting in any way, feeling uninspired, then figure out what it is you need, and continue that, because, there's so many amazing, talented photographers out there, but I think that it's easy to get burned out. So find your passions, outside of work, because I feel like a lot of times we get sequestered in this idea that we have the perfect job and that we're constantly inspired. But if you don't have a way to kind of balance that out, then you're going to end up burning yourself out. Thirdly, I would say, and this is just more comes back to the business sense of it, but once again, there's a lot of creatives out there, but if you don't have a sense for business and marketing, then you're never going to be able to take your work to the next level. So I think that it's important, as much time as we spend on creating images, we need to spend on marketing those images and on putting those images out there. And that might mean, spending 50% of the time creating work and 20% of the time doing PR for yourself and putting your work out there and being proactive, and the other 30% is staying inspired. I think it needs to be hand in hand. I think that people will find great value when they realize and they create channels for themselves to market their own stuff, because that's really, I think, the beauty of this day and age is that everyone has a voice. So if you make your voice heard, then you can really go far.
Those are some of the best tips and advice I've heard in a long time.
Oh, thanks, man. Well, the sad thing is, all those pieces of advice I've learned the hard way, because I know what it's like to be uninspired and then get burned out. I know what it's like to shoot 9 months out of the year and then be like, wow, I shot less the year before, but I made more money. It's because you don't make money when you're on the road shooting. You make money when you're sitting in the office or you're promoting your work, right? So there has to be that balance, and that's one thing people don't realize. It's not about being continually busy. It's about setting yourself up so that you have the right way to push your work, and even if you create one good photograph a month and you promote that photograph in the best way that you can, then you're going to be a successful photographer.
Fantastic. Well, Chris, thank you so much. This has been really fantastic talking with you. It's been awesome. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think you've given some great nuggets of advice in there for people, and I'll make sure as well that video is available on the podcast page as well. And I really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today. So you take care, stay safe in the water.
I will.
And hopefully we'll get to talk to you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.